Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Get Prepped. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you how to create your very own mix template from scratch. Now, I'll be doing this in Pro Tools, but the techniques and the routing that I'm going to show you can be applied across any DAW. This won't be an in-depth look at my full mix template, however, there will be enough information here to get you started on making your very own. Eventually, over time, you'll find the plugins, the settings, and the routing that best fits your workflow. But I'm more than happy to get you started. And with that being said, let's get into it. So here we are, brand new Pro Tools session. And as I've said before, there's nothing more intimidating than looking at a blank Pro Tools session. So the first thing that I want to create is a mix bus, right? Where is all of my audio going to be funneled to create my final product? So to create a mix bus, I'm going to hit Shift-Command-N, Command-Right for stereo, Command-Down for aux. We'll just call this mix bus. All right, and don't forget to solo isolate your mix bus. Now you might be thinking, why are we using an aux and not a master fader? I prefer to use an aux for two reasons. Number one, I'm not the biggest fan of bouncing. When I'm mixing in real time. The plugins are all processing my audio and spitting it back out in real time. So why then, after I'm done mixing the song and I've put all this attention to detail, am I gonna let the computer all of a sudden take over and do work behind the scenes that I can't interact with and I can't have any control over? Even if it's bouncing online or playback is live, I prefer to just watch it go down. I prefer to just see the waveform and interact with it in that kind of way. The second reason is the math is just different. I've started mixes with auxes as my mix bus and then switched it to a master fader and it sounded different. I've started mixes with a master fader and then switched to an aux and it sounded different. If you asked me what was different, I couldn't point it out and say, you know what, the kick is louder. It just sounded different. The mix kind of collapsed. And if I'm going to be using auxes to sum everything else in my mix, you know, if I'm going to make a bus for all of my drums, the drums are going to be going to a drum aux, not a drum master fader. Why not just make the mix bus another aux? But with that all being said, if you prefer a master fader, go ahead and skip this step, make a master fader. Because I prefer to use an aux, we're going to need a set of print tracks to record our mix into. And to do that, Shift-Command-N, Command-Right for stereo. We're going to leave it at audio track. We're going to call this song name _ BP, or your initials, mix 1. Let's copy that. That'll become important later. Don't forget to solo isolate your audio track. Now we're going to set this to no input and make the output of our mix bus track song name. And the reason that I like to do this and have the song name and my initials in there is so that when I record the mix, right, all of the details are printed automatically into the file. So you have the name of the song, my initials so they know that I'm the mixer, and also what mix number I'm on. But let's go ahead and delete that by doing Shift-Command-B, and that's just because we don't want any audio in our template. Next, we have to make a track for our limiter. To do that, click the output of your print track, hit New Track, and we'll call this limiter. All right, don't forget to solo isolate. Make that a little larger. And you see it's creating the inputs and the outputs for us. Now you might be asking, why do we have the limiter on a separate track? Can't you just put the limiter on the mix bus? I could, but then I'd be wasting a possible slot for a plugin that I'd need to get printed to the mix. So instead, I like to print a version of the mix with no limiter, and then run it through a limiter, and then have the limiter print into a separate print track. So let's go ahead and create that second print track. New track. Make this one an audio track, and we'll paste our copied song name before, and we'll call this track L2. Now I'm putting L2 because I like to use a FabFilter Pro L2, but you can go ahead and put Ozone or whatever limiter you're using in your mixes. Now some of you might be asking, why are we using a limiter at all? The fact is, most people aren't used to hearing unmastered music. When you play something on Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music, that music has been treated. It's been treated to be as loud as possible, but without causing any distortion. Meanwhile, a good mix sits anywhere between -6 and -2 dBs below that threshold where you'll get that distortion. So by sending your clients a mix with a limiter on it, you're allowing yourself to compete in loudness with the music that they're already comfortable listening to. And you can also check what it sounds like against other mixes. Now again, if you're using a master fader, you'll have to put your limiter on your master fader. Just be sure to bypass the limiter when you go to send your mix for mastering. Now the last thing that I'll make is a track for my meters. Again, we could put the meters on the mix bus, but why take up a slot? Let's just have it on a separate track. To do that, let's just hit New Track in the sends, make it an aux track. We'll call this meters. Make sure that your send fader is set to 0, otherwise you won't see anything on your meters. Solo isolate that and move it all the way to the top of your session. Lastly, make sure that your meter track has no output. You can see here that the meter track is set to default to your speakers, but so is your print track. In this way, you'll be hearing your mix twice. You don't want to do that. So we'll just set the output to no output. Lastly, I'll just add some colors. I like to make my print tracks purple. They're the only tracks in my sessions that are purple. And I like to make the limiter a nice bright red. Okay, so we've set up our print section. Our individual tracks are going to be funneled into the mix bus, which then gets recorded into an audio track, which then gets run through a limiter, which then gets recorded into another separate mix pass. We also have our meters tapping in from the mix bus. Next, I'm going to be creating subgroups. You might not use subgroups, and that's totally fine. I like to use them because I'm a big fan of top-down mixing. Mixing top-down means making broad strokes changes to the entire song or instrument group as a whole, rather than focusing on the small details when you first start out. I feel like having control over the instruments as a whole gets me to better mixes faster. So let's go ahead and make some subgroups. We'll do Shift-Command-N. Let's do 12, Command-Right for stereo subgroups, Command-Down for auxes, and we'll call these group. Now, with all of our tracks selected, we'll hit Shift, Option, Command, and Solo. That'll solo isolate all of the tracks we just created. Now let's scroll these in a view, and I'm going to name these in the same exact order that I like to organize my sessions. For instance, I always put the drums at the top of my session, so the top subgroup is going to be my drums. And if we hit Command-Enter, it'll bring us down to the next track in line, and we can go ahead and name that. And we'll just keep doing this until all of our tracks are named. Now, this is the order that I like to organize my sessions, but if you have a different organization in mind, feel free to replace it with your own. Again, this is all about keeping you efficient. Next, let's route all of our subgroups to the mix bus. So with all of them selected, hit Shift, Option, go to the output, select Track, Mix Bus. So all of our subgroups get routed into our mix bus, which gets recorded into the mix, blah, 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 blah. But how are we going to get in to the subgroups? Let's go check out our I/O. So if we scroll down, we can hit New Path. Let's make 12 stereo auxes, and we'll call these group. Now, let's go ahead and rename these in the same exact order that they appear in our template, and you'll see why I do that in a second. Now that all of our buses are created in the same exact order as they appear in our template, let's assign their inputs. Hit Shift, Option, Command, hit the topmost subgroup, select bus, and drum group. As you can see, it assigned all of the inputs in order that we created them. So drum group is assigned to drum group, bass group goes to bass group, and so on and so forth. So let's go take a look at our I/O and get things organized. So if you see here, all of the buses that I've been making are at the bottom of my I/O, which means that when I go to route something, these options are going to be at the bottom of my menu. I don't like that, because my print tracks are at the top, and my subgroups are at the top. So let's go ahead and order these and put them at the top. So now, when I go to route something to a bus, you can see here that they're all in track order. This also preserves the original 24 buses that Pro Tools wants to make for you, so you can use these for side chaining or any future effects you want to use later on in the mix. Alright, so we've created our print section, we've created our subgroups, now comes the fun part, adding in your favorite plugins. So if you've seen any of my last videos, you've heard me talk a lot about the SSL 9000J. I spent a lot of time recording behind that console, and I'm used to the way that certain things sound passing through that desk. So let's go ahead and put an SSL plugin on each subgroup. Now this plugin has a couple of settings defaulted that I don't think I'll need when I first pull up the plugin. For instance, I don't want it to automatically compress, I don't think I'll need the filters, and I don't want the virtual gain all the way up. Alright, let's go ahead and make that inactive so we're not using any CPU. Let's just drag that down to all of our subgroups. Next, I'm a huge fan of using Slate's Revival from the Virtual Mix Rack on drums, bass, and vocals. So let's go ahead and set that up. And as you can see, Virtual Mix Rack is defaulted to my favorite plugin. We'll do the same thing here, just make it inactive so it's not using CPU, drag it to the bass, and the lead vocals. Some other things I'll use on drums are the Ozone Vintage Limiter. This is so I can get my drums crazy loud, but still avoid any actual peaking. I'll often just set the ceiling to 0.1, true peak, and I'll leave the threshold up, but adjust it if I need to later. Another plugin I like to use on drums is the Universal Audio 670 Fairchild. And I know this plugin comes a bit loud, so I'm gonna go ahead and dial back the output, turn the threshold all the way down because again, I don't want it to start compressing until I tell it to. All right, let's make that inactive. I also like using the Mag EQ4 on lead vocals, so let's go ahead and drag that in. I'll often do de-essing on the lead vocals together. Don't do more than 4 dBs of gain reduction there. I can drag these to my other vocals as well. I've also become a huge fan of the J37 on synths, guitars, and keys. So let's go ahead and set those up. So let's go ahead and make that inactive and drag that where it's needed. These are just some examples of some things that I have in my mix template, but again, this is all about what you like to use. If you have a certain compressor in mind to mix your drums through, go ahead and throw that on there. If you have a certain EQ you like to use on vocals, go ahead and put it on there. It's about what you like and what's going to make you a faster engineer. Now you might have seen me adjusting some of these settings. That's because I know that those are things that I already do during mixes. You know, the S isn't only at 7K, it's a little broader, so I already just have that set there in my template. I don't really want the drums to start being compressed, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the compressor off. This way the option is there, but I still have to tweak it in order to sound the way that I want it to sound. Now you might be asking yourself, why are we putting so many plugins on this template if we haven't even heard any music yet? Now the reason for this is twofold. Reason number one, I'm going to use a variation of these plugins at some point. I know that I'm going to compress all my drums together to make them sound more cohesive. I know I'm going to EQ all my vocals together to make them shine. So why not already have my compressor and my EQ ready to go? And not only that, I have multiple flavors of compression and EQ. You know, I can go for the Fairchild compressor, I can go for the SSL compressor, I can EQ with the SSL, or I can EQ with the Revival plugin. You know, having all these flavors ready to go at a moment's notice is going to make my decision-making process much quicker. The second reason that I do this is because the amount of time that it takes me to click my plugin menu, think about what plugin I want to use, scroll through my menu, it's too much time being wasted. I found that when I first started out as an engineer, the money I was getting for a mix wasn't equal to the amount of time I was spending on the mix. So in this sense, when you're first starting out, the key to success is maximizing your output while minimizing your input. Now that's not me saying you shouldn't be trying your hardest to get a good mix. That's me saying you should be working smarter, not harder. If you can get to the sound that you have in your head a second before I can, you'll get hired before me 9 times out of 10, especially in circumstances where you're sitting in the room with an artist. Just to prove my point, let's see how long it takes me to pull up the UAD Fairchild plugin by going through the menus. And just to be fair, I assure you I'll be going as fast as I can. And go. Dynamics, UAD, Fairchild, 670 Legacy. All right, not that bad. For comparison, let's see how long it takes me to find the plugin in my template. Not only did I pull out the plugin faster, but it's properly gain staged, and it's not going to automatically compress my drums. So we've added some plugins that I like on the subgroups. Let's take a look at the mix bus. I've become a big fan of the Townhouse compressor, so let's go ahead and throw that on there. And again, just working in the settings that I know I'm going to use. Again, you saw me tweaking things there. Those aren't going to be the permanent settings. Those aren't the settings on my mix bus, but they're definitely in the ballpark of things that I like to do on my mix bus. Now, instead of dialing in all the settings from scratch, I'm already in the ballpark and I can start moving quickly when I start mixing a song. Let's also not forget to put plugins on our meter track. I have a hardware meter, the Clarity M, but feel free to put any meter plugin that you feel comfortable with. Now, the last things that I'll create are effects tracks. These tracks are going to be holding all the plugins and the settings that I like to use when I'm actually doing a mix. For example, I've been doing a lot of drum parallel compression and parallel compression on my vocals. So let's go ahead and set those up. So let's go ahead and hit Shift-Command-N, Command-Right for stereo, Command-Down for aux input. Let's call this drum parallel. Let's make sure to solo isolate this. And I'm going to color this maybe a dark blue. Now for quick and dirty compression, I'll often use the FabFilter Pro C2. Crazy high ratio. Again, this isn't like the perfect setting. This is just something to get me in the ballpark. I'll often do another instance of the 670. And this one we'll get a little crazier with. And I'll often throw a decapitator at the very end if I really want that dirty, crunchy, distorted, parallel drum sound. Next, we'll make a track for the vocal parallel. We'll hit Shift-Command-N. We'll leave it mono, we'll hit Command-Down for aux, and then just call this vocal parallel. I'll color this one maybe like a sandy brown. Now on vocal parallel, I very rarely send a full frequency vocal. So let's go ahead and start cutting out some lows. And roll off a little bit of the top end. And these settings I'll dial in to taste with each song. I also like to de-ess before I hit the parallel compressor, so let's go ahead and throw a de-esser at the beginning of the chain. And lastly, the actual compressor. I've been using an 1176 for a while and it hasn't steered me wrong, so let's go ahead and just set that up. Lastly, let's just make the buses to get into these effects tracks. We'll hit F18 to get to our I/O, hit New Path, we'll create one stereo and call this Drum Parallel. We'll create one mono called Vocal Parallel. So now let's just assign this as inputs. Go to Bus, Drum Parallel, Vocal, Vocal Parallel. Lastly, let's be sure to assign the drum parallel to the drum group and the vocal parallel to the vocal group. All right, now we're not looking at a blank Pro Tools session. Now I can clearly see my game plan. My instruments are going to be bussed to my subgroups. I can affect the subgroups in a larger manner, and then the subgroups get bussed to the mix bus. The mix bus gets printed here, this print gets limited, and then this limited version gets printed here. Now think about it this way. We've been doing this for 15 minutes now, just getting set up. Haven't even heard any music yet. Imagine if we had to do this every time we sat down to mix a song. Imagine you want to compress your drums, and every time you want to do so, you have to go up and then find the plugin and drag and do all that stuff. Now, all of our flavors and all of our options are up and ready to go. And there may be the case that the Fairchild is not the right choice for these drums. If that's the case, then I'll spend the time and I'll search for the proper plugin. But if I'm using the Fairchild 9 out of 10 times, let's just have it up. I'd rather go with what I know for now to get started, and then adjust as I see fit. So now we have the bare bones of a mixing template. But how do we go about using this template? First, we're going to save this to a secure location. I use Dropbox, but feel free to put this on a hard drive, your desktop, wherever you can get to it quickly. So we're going to go to File, Save Copy In, make sure Audio Files is not selected, because again, if you're mixing someone else's song, maybe you recorded something in here by accident, you don't want to bring any external audio into someone else's song. Hit OK. Go to your desired destination. So mine is my templates folder in Dropbox. And we'll create a new folder called BP Mix Templates. And we'll call this BP Mix Template July 2020. Now the reason we save in a secure location is so A, we can easily access it, and B, we can easily update it. So this is the version that I saved in Dropbox. Let's say a month from now, I think that I want to add a new plugin on my drums, right? Let's go ahead and add a new plugin on the drums. But instead of saving over July or just having one file called template, I can save as August. So if we go back to the folder where I store my templates, you can see here, I have like a running log of all of the templates over the years. This way, if I feel like using something that I used to use, back in the day, like, oh, what was that plugin that I used to use on, vocals? It was great. I can go searching through my templates and import the data. So let's create a new session so I can show you guys how to import the data from your template into a brand new mix. All right, so here we are staring again at a blank Pro Tools session. First thing we want to do is hit Shift-Option-I, which is import session data. Go to our templates folder, import the most recent template, open, and then option click the top track. Hit OK. And as you can see, it brought in not only our tracks, but our plugins, our settings, and the routing that we like to use. So once I've imported the template, the first thing you want to do is to scroll up and input monitor your print tracks. If you don't do this, you won't hear any audio. If you're using a master fader, you can skip that step. Next, let's import our stems. Now you'll notice I used copy and not add. When you use add, Pro Tools is going to look for the files wherever they originally are. For instance, if you drag the kick sample in from your downloads folder and then delete it from your downloads folder, Pro Tools will no longer be able to find that file. But by using copy, we actually copy the kick sample into our audio files folder so that Pro Tools always knows where to find it. Let's go ahead and add these to the session start. I'm going to make these smaller so I can see everything. I happen to know that this beat is at 155, so let's go ahead and set that. Now the next thing I want to do is just see all of my tracks and organize them the same way that they're organized in my subgroups. So if my drums are at the top, my drums are going to go at the top. The next group is my bass group. Let's go ahead and put that there. Guitars would be next. Then the horns, and then my beat tag, SFX. The next thing I'll do is assign no input to all of my stems. There's no real reason to this, I just think it looks neater. Next, I'll color code all of my tracks. Now, believe it or not, these colors are actually a part of my template. The drums are always baby blue, the bass is brown, the guitars are orange, and yada yada yada. This allows me to find my instruments much quicker. You could open up a session of mine from 2017, and I would know that the kick drum is the first track that's baby blue at the very top. I can tell you that the bass is a brown track beneath the last drum track. The faster I can find these instruments, the faster I can get the artist the results they're looking for. Next, I'll group all of my tracks. So this allows me to see which subgroups I'll need to mix this song. I am using drums, I am using bass, there are no keys, there are no synths. The SFX is my beat tag. I might need the InstEffects groups for drum reverbs, etc., but there's no vocals. So let's go ahead and get rid of these tracks so I can make my session more condensed. And the last thing I'll do is just go ahead and route these to the necessary subgroups. Alright, so we're not fully prepared to mix, but let's go ahead and dive in so I can show you guys why I like to have all of these plugins set up ahead of time. Alright, not that bad, rough mix isn't that bad, but I do hear that the hi-hats can be a little crispier, the percussion can be a little more exciting in the high mids. I think the drums overall needs a little more top end presence. So instead of going down to my hi-hats and making those crispy, let's EQ the drums as a whole. Alright, so we already have a crispier hi-hat, we have more excitement from the claps and the percussion, and I didn't even touch those tracks yet. Let me go ahead and solo those so you can hear the differences I was actually making. Alright, so they're already way more exciting, and I've only used one plugin. Let's keep going. Alright, so we're making some pretty big moves. Let me go ahead and A/B so you can hear the differences that we're making. Again, I haven't even touched the individual tracks yet. Huge difference, and that's only maybe 6 or 7 plugins that I have on there. So once I started dialing in my subgroups, I'll go ahead and move up to my mix bus. All right, not too bad. And again, we've only used less than 10 plugins. Let's go ahead and A/B. Now my mix is getting a little hot, so I'm going to go ahead and lower the output. And lastly, let's apply some limiting. All right, so you're all set and you're ready to go. Just be sure that before you start mixing, you go ahead and rename these tracks, the actual song name. Copy, we'll just paste that here and add L2. And once you've done that, you're ready to go. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you learned something, hope you enjoyed. I'm gonna go ahead and leave a link down in the description where you can download a version of this template with no plugins. That way, hopefully you'll be inspired to fill it out with things that work best in your workflow. Whoa, Brandon from the future here. Just realizing now that I only did this tutorial in Pro Tools and that people who mix in Ableton and Logic might be feeling a bit left out. So bearing that in mind, I went ahead and created templates for Ableton and Logic. Now the Ableton and Logic templates won't have the print tracks that I use where I record the mix back into the DAW. I've tried to record back into Ableton and Logic, but I found that the difference is almost negligible. So in these templates, you'll be getting the subgroups routed directly to the stereo output. I've also created a version of this template with the master fader instead of the aux mix bus. That way, if you prefer to use a master fader, you can still get in on the fun. Just wanted to let you guys know that I was thinking about you. Now let's go ahead and get back to the video. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time on Get Prepped.